I'm Eric Deakins, and with my colleague Nigel Spearing, we're going to build on what we've said already about British entry into the European Common Market in the early 1960s by going back to the debate in the House of Commons on the issue of principle of whether or not Britain should join. That debate lasted 6 days in 1971, in October 1971. Over 200 members wanted to take part in the debate because it was so contentious and so important that the Government House, there's ever been a debate lasting 6 days on an issue of such importance. And before even the Prime Minister, Edward Heath, opened the debate on the issue of principle as to whether Britain should join the common market, my friend Nigel Spearing had already asked him a question about the issue of sovereignty and whether or not the issue of which domestic issues would be lost to the powers of the European community had been raised at all, and were they made known to Parliament and the public. And in particular, my friend asked Edward Heath, he is asking us to sign a form before he is prepared to show us the small print, which I think sums up the way in which the House of Commons, even in those days, was treated by the Conservative government of the day on this most important issue of principle. They were being asked to vote for an issue of principle without knowing all the nitty-gritty detail which would enable them to make a truly informed decision.
Well, my friend Eric Deakins, who was there with me at the time, very kindly has read that out. It was great good fortune because we have a sort of a draw as to who shall ask the Prime Minister questions. And I put in to do so and asked him the question which just Eric has said. For this reason, that this was the day we were starting this series of debates which lasted over 60 hours in total within about 4 or 5 days. Much of it into the night and going through to the early hours of the morning on at least one occasion. But we knew, those of us who were against the proposal, not because we were not internationalists, but because we were. And we could see this was more of a party political and on the side of capital as against the side of cooperation and real international, a common market for capital too, real international cooperation, that of all parties we were against it. Many people in both parties, and indeed as Eric has just said, it was people of both parties who were opposed, maybe for different reasons, and people of both parties, main parties that were for. The Liberals went thither and thither, and indeed they joined later with the Social Democrats, who were some Labour people who wanted to go through it. So we were all cross-party at the same time, and that's why this debate was important. But it was important not only because of the length of time, but the motion that it was there which was carried. Meanwhile, that we enjoyed in principle, we agreed in principle to join on the terms negotiated. Here it is it was moved, and I think Eric will now got the actual quote. It was moved by the then Foreign Secretary and said, on principle, to join the European communities on the basis of the arrangements which have been negotiated. But I mean, what wider can you get than arrangements? It wasn't even the terms. The arrangements, which are even wider than anything which is written down. And that was, in our view, not only a deceit, but showed up what many of us were against the whole episode by saying that it was mounted on a false criteria because it wasn't international at all, because it was increasing competitiveness, because that was the rule of the EU. It was an area of competition. Competition was actually built in to the constitution of this body. You had to have it. That was what it was for. And whilst many of us on both sides of the House wanted to see a degree of competition, one party more than another, and one party in the middle who wanted a mixture of both, we didn't want to be told by people outside what that rule should be. And yet this motion, where everybody could have a go, oh yes, you can have, everybody will be able to speak if we all ration the time in this time, and virtually that happened. It was in fact done without the detail. And that's what happened for the period of that time.
Yes, it is really a mockery of democracy to ask the nation's representatives in Parliament to approve something where they don't know the details of what it is they are being asked to approve. They were being asked to approve a principle without knowing all the details of what accepting that principle would involve. And this, I'm afraid, was one of the deficiencies of the Conservative government's approach on this issue in 1971. Subsequently, they produced a bill for debate in Parliament to ensure that British law took account of all that had been negotiated by the Prime Minister and his colleagues. And that bill itself was restrictive because those who took part in its debates and in the important committee stage on that bill were debarred from moving amendments on major issues of principle, since the House had already approved those issues, so-called, in this debate in 1971, October.
And I've got here Eric's a few statements which Eric made on that debate. On the 20th of January 1972, in his early part of his speech, he said, my friend here, the exceptional nature of this treaty lies not only in its wide-ranging provisions, but in the fact that it is a treaty without an end. Well, he meant without an end. It could go on and on and on, as indeed it has. We're even up to Lisbon going through the capitals of Europe now. It's gone on for that time. It's going more and more, closer and closer, ever closer union. That's what the Treaty of Rome said. Now I continue what he said. It is a treaty which we are supposed to be signing forever and ever. That in itself is an exceptional circumstance. I would say it's unique. Then he went on to say, we have a constitutional principle that no parliamentarian no parliament can bind its successor. Of course it can't, otherwise you haven't got a democracy. Are there not here the seeds of a potential constitutional conflict between the needs of a future parliament in the interests of the British people, as it might interpret them, and the fact that a previous government have committed the country in perpetuity by signing a treaty which has no time limit? And not only that, of course, one with pretty stiff rules at that. And he finished, we need clarification of this fundamental point before the treaty is signed. But of course we didn't get the terms at all. That's what Eric and I and others in that long debate around January 1972 were saying. So it wasn't as though there was a degree of warning of what was going on. There was. But for various reasons, the government and other people whose immediate advantages they thought was theirs were actually making not an opposite case, but were making excuses and to some extent deluding the voting public